I was folding laundry when I heard the truck outside. Not the friendly kind that brings packages or mail. This one growled like it was hungry. When I stepped onto the porch, my daughter Vanessa was already halfway up the driveway, waving her phone like she was timing a delivery. Her husband Ethan followed behind, holding a clipboard and that smug look people get when they think they're doing you a favor. "Mom," she said, breathless but firm, "you don't need this old stuff anymore. We're taking it for our new house." I laughed because it sounded ridiculous. My couch? My refrigerator? Even the old oak table her father built? I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. In less than 5 minutes, 2 movers I'd never seen before started hauling my things into their truck. It all happened so quickly, so calmly, like they'd rehearsed it. Vanessa pointed with her manicured nails. "That one goes, that one too, oh!" and grabbed the portrait from the hallway. The portrait. My late husband smiling in his navy uniform. She didn't even look at it, just turned away like it meant nothing. "Vanessa," I tried to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing?" She sighed. "Mom, please, we're trying to make space for you to move into something smaller. You'll be happier, less to clean, less stress." Ethan chimed in, all charm and fake warmth. "It's for the best, Ellie. You know how much we love you." Funny how people always say they love you right before they take something from you. I stood there, frozen, while the sound of furniture scraping across the floor filled the house. Every thud was a memory being erased. My living room emptied faster than I could process. The floral couch where Vanessa learned to read. The coffee table with a dent from when she dropped her high school trophy. Gone. When I tried to stop one of the movers, Ethan stepped between us. "Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." That line, "don't make this harder," stuck in my head like a splinter. They took everything. My dishes, the rug I bought at the flea market, the clock from our 25th anniversary. I watched them carry out 30 years of my life, one box at a time, while my daughter checked her phone. When they were done, Vanessa dusted her hands and smiled. "We'll bring you something new, Mom. Modern stuff. You'll love it." I looked around at the empty walls, the sunlight hitting the bare floor. And where exactly am I supposed to sit until then? She glanced at Ethan, then back at me. "We thought you might spend a few days at the trailer, just until we get the new furniture set up." The trailer. The old mobile home my late husband used to fix engines in. It hadn't been lived in for years. I wanted to yell. I wanted to say something that would stop her, make her remember who she used to be. But the words never came out. My throat tightened, and all that escaped was a tired breath. Ethan reached out like he was patting a dog. "It's only temporary, Ellie, you'll see." The truck engine started again. Vanessa climbed inside, rolled down the window and said, "Mom, don't be upset. We're doing this for you." For me. I stood in the doorway and watched the truck back down the driveway. The sound of gravel under its tires was louder than anything I'd heard all day. They didn't even look back. Then, just before the truck reached the gate, Ethan hit the brakes hard. The boxes in the back shifted. Vanessa leaned forward, staring at something near the gate. I couldn't see what it was from the porch, but I could see her face pale. She whispered something to Ethan, and for a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then the truck rolled forward slowly and disappeared down the road. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I stepped inside and looked at the walls. Empty hooks, dusty outlines where pictures used to hang. The echo of my footsteps felt like walking through someone else's life. I sat on the bare floor, thinking about the years I spent trying to make that house feel like a home. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there until the light outside turned orange and the air smelled like rain. Somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about furniture or space. It was about control, about how easy it is to convince an aging parent that she's in the way. If you've ever had someone you love take advantage of your kindness, tell me in the comments. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. And if you want more true family revenge stories where karma comes quietly but hits hard, make sure to subscribe, because sometimes losing everything is how the real story begins. The smell of dust still lingered in the air when I opened the back door that night. The house felt hollow, like someone had scooped out its soul. I leaned against the kitchen counter, well, where it used to be, and let my eyes wander to the nail holes on the wall. Each one held a memory, and each one hurt a little more to look at. That's when I saw it, the small wooden growth chart I used to mark Vanessa's height on. She was 5 when she made me promise I'd never paint over it. The last mark said age 12, almost taller than Mom. I ran my fingers over the grooves and tried to remember when she stopped wanting to grow next to me. I remembered the day I first promised her the world. She was 8, wearing a pink dress too big for her and holding a torn storybook. We were sitting by the window while her father, Robert, worked in the yard. Vanessa looked up at me and said, "Mom, someday I'll buy you a big house with windows that shine and a kitchen that never runs out of cookies." I laughed. "I don't need a big house, honey, just you." And she said, "Then I'll make sure you always have me." It's strange how love can sound like a guarantee when you're young. Years later, when Robert got sick, I used to remind Vanessa of that promise. She'd visit between college classes, always rushing but polite, with that confident smile of someone who's sure life will bend for her. When she met Ethan, I thought she'd found her forever. He was smooth, ambitious, and said all the right things about family values. He'd call me Mom even before they married. I should have known that was the first red flag. People who rush to call you family are usually rehearsing something. After Robert passed, Vanessa started handling my mail. She said I shouldn't bother with the boring stuff. I trusted her. She was my daughter. The same little girl who used to fall asleep on my lap while I sewed dresses for the neighbours. The same one who cried when she couldn't afford prom shoes and I sold my jewellery to buy them. But somehow, between then and now, something in her eyes changed. She started dressing like Ethan, talking like him, even laughing like him. When she looked at me, I didn't see my daughter anymore. I saw a woman calculating what I still had left to give. I remember one night a few months ago, Ethan brought over dinner, takeout from a restaurant that spelled its name in gold letters. I was grateful until he said, "You should really think about transferring the property. It'll make things easier for Vanessa later." Vanessa nodded, smiling like it was no big deal. "It's just paperwork, Mom. Everyone does it." We're family. Family. The word that used to mean safety now sounded like a threat. Still, I didn't argue. I wanted to believe she was doing the right thing. I wanted to believe she was still that little girl marking her height on the kitchen wall. The next morning, she came back with a folder and said, "We'll stop by the notary after lunch." I hesitated, but Ethan gave me that look. The one people give to old folks when they've already decided what's best for them. So I signed. I told myself it was fine. I told myself trust was the same thing as love. Now, standing in the middle of my stripped-down kitchen, I realised that promise, "I'll always make sure you have me," had finally turned into something else. She'd kept her word in the cruelest way. I did have her, but not the version I raised. I had the one who learned how to take, not give. The rain started outside. It wasn't heavy, just enough to make the roof creak. I sat on the floor beside the growth chart and pulled one of the old boxes they hadn't bothered to take. Inside was a pile of yellowed letters, Robert's handwriting. "Ellie, no matter what happens, remember this house is yours. You built every inch of it with love." I traced his signature with my finger and felt that lump crawl up my throat. Somewhere between love and loss, I'd missed the moment when my daughter stopped being my world and started building her own at my expense. The lights flickered. The sound of thunder rolled far off, but I didn't move. The house, even half empty, still felt like it was breathing. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it felt like Robert was still there, watching quietly, waiting for me to finally open my eyes. I stood up and went to close the window, the rain pattering against my hands. The world outside looked smaller in the dark, quieter. Somewhere down the street a dog barked, and for the first time that day, I smiled. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. And that, I realised, is how every story like this begins. Not with shouting, but with silence that finally means something. The kind that happens when you stop asking why and start thinking, what next? The smell of coffee filled the small kitchen that morning, the kind that burns just a little because you forget it's brewing. I was halfway through my first sip when Vanessa walked in, hair perfect, perfume expensive, holding a manila folder under her arm like it was just another errand on her to-do list. "Morning, Mom," she said cheerfully. "We've got a quick stop today. Some paperwork for the property taxes." I blinked. "Property taxes? Yeah, just routine stuff. The city updated some forms. It's easier if we handle it now so you don't have to deal with it later." I should have asked more. I should have slowed her down. But when your child talks like she's got everything under control, it's easier to just nod and keep drinking burnt coffee. She smiled. "Ethan's already waiting in the car. I promised him we wouldn't take long." The notary office sat in a strip mall between a payday loan store and a nail salon. I'd been there once before, years ago, to notarize a retirement form. The same smell of toner and lemon disinfectant lingered. Behind the counter sat a woman with thick glasses and a stack of forms she clearly wanted nothing to do with. "Miss Brooks?" she asked without looking up. "That's me," I said. Vanessa slid the folder across the counter. "We just need to get this signed, please. She's the homeowner." The woman flipped through the pages, stamped one, yawned, then handed me a pen. "Sign here, initial there." The whole thing took less than 3 minutes. Vanessa chatted about new paint colours for her house. Ethan joked about how tax season is murder, and I, like an idiot, smiled along. When we got back to the car, Vanessa hugged me. "Thank you, Mom. You really helped us out." "Helped you out?" I asked, confused. She laughed. "I mean, helped us stay organised. You know how chaotic things get when you move." We drove in silence most of the way home. Ethan hummed to some pop song on the radio. I remember watching his reflection in the side mirror, his eyes darting back and forth like someone rehearsing a lie. When we pulled into my driveway, he said, "You're lucky, Ellie. You raised one hell of a daughter. Smart, efficient, just like her old man." I smiled politely, though inside I was uneasy. The way he said efficient made it sound like a transaction, not a compliment. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder they'd left on the counter. Curiosity or instinct, I don't know which, made me open it. The first page was exactly what Vanessa said, property tax forms, but behind it there were more pages I hadn't seen at the notary office. I started reading, my stomach tightening with every line. Transfer of ownership, quitclaim deed, recipient, Vanessa Holloway and Ethan Holloway. My name appeared in signature form on the last page, neat and legal, right where the notary stamp glared back at me. For a long moment I just stared at the ink, wondering if maybe it was a copy error, or if maybe I was reading it wrong. But the truth hit like cold water. That morning, over burnt coffee and small talk, I'd signed away my home. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse thudding in my ears. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the air heavy. Every object around me, every chair, every photo, looked temporary now, like it already belonged to someone else. I called Vanessa. No answer. I texted her, "Honey, I think there's been a mistake." Nothing. I waited. I made another coffee I didn't drink. By midnight, I tried again. This time she answered, her voice calm and practiced. "Mom, it's fine. Ethan and I just updated the paperwork, so everything's in order. You still live there, don't worry." "Updated?" "Vanessa, this says I transferred ownership." That means she cut me off. "Mom, please, you're overthinking it. Ethan's handling it with the bank. It's just to protect the property. If something happens to you, we won't have to go through legal mess." I tried to steady my breathing. "If something happens to me?" "Yes," she said, exasperated. "You know, if you get sick or worse. It's common, Mom. Everyone does it." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, feeling older than I'd ever felt in my life. The next morning, Ethan showed up alone. He had that salesman's smile plastered on. "Just dropping by to make sure everything's good," he said, looking around the house like he already owned it. I wanted to ask him what his endgame was. I wanted to throw him out, but instead I said, "Coffee?" He grinned. "You really are the sweetest mother-in-law." I poured him a cup and watched him stir too much sugar into it. "You should get used to it," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We'll be spending more time here. Vanessa's talking about renovations." That was the moment something inside me shifted. I realised I wasn't the homeowner anymore. I was a guest in my own house, tolerated out of politeness. When he left, I locked the door behind him and pressed my forehead against it. The wood was cool, solid, and for a second I wanted to disappear into it. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the window frames, the kitchen counter. Everything I loved now had someone else's name on it. On the living room wall hung a small calendar with the words "Start Fresh." Vanessa gave it to me last Christmas. The irony made me laugh. Quiet at first, then louder until it sounded more like crying. I tore the calendar down and folded it in half. The paper cracked, dry like the way my voice felt when I whispered, "All right, you want it all? Take it." But somewhere in the back of my mind, a tiny spark stayed alive, because for the first time, I knew exactly what I'd lost, and exactly who I'd lost it to. The morning air bit at my skin when I stepped outside, carrying a small box of clothes. My breath came out white in the cold. I'd never imagined I'd be leaving my home with my life path packed into cardboard. But there I was, standing in the driveway of the house I'd scrubbed, painted and paid for, now belonging to my daughter and her husband. Vanessa didn't even look guilty. She was leaning against the shiny hood of Ethan's truck, scrolling on her phone. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said flatly. "Ethan found a place for you already. It's nice. Quiet. You'll love it." Her tone sounded like she was talking about sending an old couch to storage. Ethan opened the truck door and pointed at the passenger seat. "We've got a long drive ahead, Mrs. Brooks. Might as well get going." Mrs. Brooks. Not Mom, not Ellie, just Mrs. Brooks. I climbed into the truck, holding the small box on my lap. It had my late husband's wedding ring, a few framed photos, and a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Mom." The irony of it burned in my chest. The drive was silent except for the hum of the tyres. Ethan whistled occasionally, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel like it was just another Saturday. I watched the road roll out in front of me, grey and endless, and tried to remember the last time Vanessa had hugged me without purpose. We passed through the edge of town, grocery stores, the library, the bakery where I used to buy her favourite cinnamon rolls. It all blurred together. I asked softly, "Where are we going exactly?" "Just a mobile home park off Route 6, Ethan said. "It's temporary. Vanessa says it's better for you to have your own space." My own space. That's what they called it. A polite way to say out of sight. When we pulled up, I thought he was joking. The place looked like time forgot it. A line of faded trailers sat unevenly on patches of dirt and gravel. One had a broken window covered in cardboard. Another had Christmas lights still hanging from who knows when. A small sign read Sunset Acres Senior Living Made Simple. Simple. That word again. I hated it. Ethan parked and shut off the engine. Here we are. He got out and opened the passenger door for me, like that made it civilized. Vanessa already paid the first month. Everything's set. I stepped out slowly, my shoes crunching on the gravel. The air smelled like rust and old rain. "Ethan," I said, forcing my voice steady, "does Vanessa know what this place looks like?" He gave me a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "She picked it herself, said it's affordable and quiet. You'll get used to it." He unloaded the box and placed it by the trailer's dented steps. There's a heater inside, a small kitchenette and a bed. You've got what you need. What I need. Another phrase people use when they've already taken everything you actually needed. I looked up at the trailer. Pale yellow, siding peeling, one of the steps missing. A small metal number 12 hung crooked by the door. It looked tired. So did I. When I turned to say goodbye, Ethan was already back in the truck. "Vanessa's working late tonight," he called out through the open window. "She'll check on you this weekend." He didn't wait for me to answer before he drove off. The dust kicked up behind his tyres, settled slowly, like the house was exhaling its disappointment. I stood there for a long while, holding my box. My fingers were numb from the cold. Inside the trailer, everything smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. There was a single chair, a small table, and a stained mattress on a metal frame. I sat on the edge of the bed, the springs creaking beneath me, and stared at the cracked ceiling. The silence pressed down heavy. It wasn't the peaceful kind, it was the kind that swallowed you whole. I pulled out the framed photo from my box. Vanessa at 5 years old, her face covered in frosting, smiling like the world couldn't hurt her. I touched the glass with my thumb. "You promised, baby," I whispered. A soft knock startled me. I opened the door to see a woman in her 60s, wearing a faded sweatshirt that read Texas Strong. She had kind eyes, the kind that come from surviving more than you ever expected to. "You must be the new lady in 12, she said. "I'm Patty, trailer 10. If your heat's out, don't bother calling management. Just kick it twice, works faster." I managed a weak smile. "Thank you." She looked at the box by the door, then back at me. "They always drop folks off like this," she said quietly. "Family says it's temporary." Her words hit deeper than she knew. That night, the cold seeped through the thin walls. I boiled water for tea on the tiny stove, wrapping myself in a blanket that smelled like dust. Every sound outside, cars passing, dogs barking, felt foreign. I tried to read, but the letters blurred, so I just sat there listening to the wind rattle the window frame. Somewhere, far away, I imagined Vanessa laughing at some dinner party, her life shining and effortless. I thought of calling her, but what would I say? "Hi, honey!" The trailer door sticks when it rains. No, she wouldn't pick up anyway. So instead, I wrote her a letter. Not one of anger, but of truth. I told her that this wasn't about money or houses or inheritance. It was about respect, about the kind of love that doesn't sell out when things get comfortable. I didn't know if I'd ever send it. Maybe it wasn't meant for her at all. Maybe it was just something I needed to write for myself, to remember that I hadn't gone silent yet. When the heater clicked off for the night, I pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the small lamp flickering beside the bed. It hummed softly, like an old friend refusing to quit, and for the first time since leaving home, I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing in the quiet, letting the cold remind me that I was still alive. The wind rattled the loose siding outside, and the trailer shook just enough to remind me it wasn't built for comfort. I woke up to that sound every morning, along with the creak of old pipes that coughed more than they flowed. Still, it was quiet, maybe too quiet. I made coffee on the tiny stove, instant, bitter, barely warm, the kind of coffee that makes you think about the good kind you used to have. I took a sip anyway. That morning routine became my way of pretending everything was still normal, that I was still someone who had control over her own life. Patty, the neighbour who called herself the unofficial mayor of Sunset Acres, knocked around noon. She always had a way of showing up when my thoughts got too heavy. "You've got to eat something real, Hon," she said, holding a paper plate covered in foil. "It's meatloaf. Not fancy, but it sticks to your ribs," I smiled. "You didn't have to." She waved me off. "That's what people say right before they do something stupid, like skip meals." We sat at my little table while she talked about her son in Dallas, who hadn't called in 3 years. "Kids these days," she said, shaking her head. "They forget who changed their diapers." I nodded, but my mind drifted. I thought about Vanessa, my daughter, my pride once, and wondered if she had even thought about me since dropping me off here. She probably had her hands full redecorating the house she stole. I pictured her hanging new curtains, maybe even throwing a housewarming party. She'd call it something like a fresh start. That thought used to make me angry. Now it just made me tired. After Patty left, I pulled out my sewing machine, the one thing I refused to let them take. It sat on a small folding table near the window. The machine was old, the kind that needed oiling and coaxing, but it still worked. I set up a few pieces of scrap fabric and began to stitch. The sound filled the trailer, steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. It wasn't just sewing, it was remembering. Every hem and seam took me back to the days I worked late into the night for Michael's school uniforms or Vanessa's prom dress. I used to stay up until sunrise, listening to the hum of the machine while the rest of the world slept. Back then, I believed hard work could buy you love, that sacrifice always came back around. By evening, I had a small pile of pillow covers, nothing fancy, but neat and useful. I took a picture of them on my old flip phone and texted Vanessa. "Made these today. Thought they'd look nice in the living room. Want me to drop them off?" No reply. Not even the little read notification. I stared at that screen for a long time before putting the phone face down. Some silences are louder than words. The days blurred together after that. Sewing, walking to the corner store, talking to Patty about old TV shows. I tried not to think about the house, but sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard the sound of my old fridge humming or the floorboards creaking under Robert's heavy steps. The memories felt like ghosts that had followed me here, unwilling to let go. Then, one afternoon, as I sat by the window mending a torn dress for Patty, I heard the mail truck stop outside. The driver waved and dropped off a single envelope. No return address, just my name written in Vanessa's handwriting. For a second, my heart jumped. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she realised what she'd done. I tore it open. Inside was a typed letter, not handwritten. "Mom, please don't be upset," it began. "Ethan and I decided it's best if we handle things from now on. The house needed repairs and we refinanced it under our names to cover costs. We'll send you some money each month for your expenses. You don't need to worry about anything. Enjoy your peace and rest. Love, Vanessa." Love. That word again, tossed in at the end like an afterthought. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter until the words blurred. Enjoy your peace. As if peace was something you could mail to someone like a consolation prize. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer with the others. The bills, the eviction notice, the notary copy of the transfer. A neat little archive of betrayal. That night, Patty knocked again. "You're quiet today," she said. I handed her the letter. She read it, sighed, and handed it back. "Some people mistake peace for silence," she said. "You don't owe them that." Her words stayed with me. I couldn't sleep. I sat up, thinking about every decision that had brought me here, every time I'd chosen love over logic, trust over truth. I realised something simple but sharp. The world doesn't fall apart all at once. It unravels thread by thread, usually while you're too busy trying to keep it stitched together. I got up, turned on the sewing lamp and started writing on the back of an old receipt. Not a letter, Vanessa, this time, but something for myself. I'm not finished. I'm still standing, and one day she'll see me again, not as her victim, but as her reminder. The machine sat there in the corner, quiet and waiting. I touched it, felt the familiar cold metal under my fingers, and smiled. The next morning, I pinned that receipt to the wall right above the sewing table. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a promise I could actually keep. The air smelled like rain again, but softer this time, the kind that carries dust instead of washing it away. I was sitting by the trailer window, finishing a hem on Patty's dress, when the knock came. It wasn't sharp like a bill collector's or hurried like a delivery guy's. It was gentle. 2 slow taps, then one after a pause, like someone who remembered knocking on my door before. When I opened it, a man stood there in a tan jacket, his hair completely grey, but his posture still straight. He was holding a box of pastries from the bakery downtown. "You must be Mrs. Brooks," he said, smiling politely. "I'm Frank O'Connor. We went to Ridgeway High together. You probably don't remember me." I stared at him for a second, trying to match that lined face with the one in my memories. "Frank O'Connor?" I repeated slowly, then it hit me. The boy who sat behind me in chemistry, always doodling blueprints in his notebook. The one who used to share half his lunch when I forgot mine. "I remember you," I said, surprised at how natural it felt. "You wanted to be an architect," he chuckled. "And you wanted to be a teacher. I guess we both took detours." I laughed for the first time in weeks, the kind that felt rusty coming out of my chest. "How did you find me?" He shifted the pastry box in his hands. "I ran into Patty at the hardware store. She mentioned you used to live on Maple Drive. I couldn't believe it was you, so I thought I'd stop by." I invited him in, embarrassed by how small the place looked. The wallpaper was peeling, the floor creaked, and the smell of machine oil from my sewing table hung in the air. But Frank didn't seem to mind. He set the pastries on the table, looked around and said, "You always did have a way of making a place feel like home." We sat down with weak coffee, the kind I'd stopped pretending was good, and started catching up. Frank had spent 30 years working construction in Charleston before retiring. "Got divorced, no kids, too many projects," he said with a grin. "Now I just fix things for people who can't afford a handyman. Keeps me busy." When I told him about the house, or rather how I lost it, he didn't interrupt or pity me. He just listened, nodding slowly. "You know, finally, I've seen this happen a lot. Folks work their whole lives for something, then trust the wrong people to take care of it." "I thought she'd never hurt me," I said quietly. "She's my daughter." He took a sip of coffee and looked at me over the rim of his cup. "That's what makes it hurt most. Betrayal from blood cuts deeper because it's supposed to be the one place you're safe." The words sat between us like truth too old to argue with. I don't know why, but talking to him felt easy. Maybe it was because he didn't look at me like I was fragile. He asked about my sewing, about the community centre where I used to volunteer, about Robert. And when I spoke of Robert's passing, he didn't say the usual things people say. I'm sorry for your loss, or he's in a better place. He just said, he must have loved you like hell to build a life like that with you. We talked until it got dark. When Frank finally stood to leave, he said, "You shouldn't stay out here alone, Ellie. This place doesn't deserve you." I smiled faintly. "Where else would I go?" He hesitated, then said, "Let me come by tomorrow. I'll help you fix that leaky window. It's whistling every time the wind hits it." And just like that, he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his words. "This place doesn't deserve you." I walked to the mirror above the sink and stared at my reflection. The woman staring back wasn't the mother who'd been evicted or the seamstress hunched over fabric. She was someone still breathing, still capable of something more. The next morning, Frank showed up right on time with a toolbox and a grin. "You weren't kidding," he said, tapping the window frame. "This thing's one strong breeze away from flying off." I made coffee while he worked. We didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't awkward. There was something comforting about the sound of his hammer and the smell of wood dust filling the air. It reminded me of the days when Robert fixed things around the house, humming under his breath. When Frank finished, he stood back to admire his work. "There," he said. "Solid again. You can keep the wind out at least." He turned toward me, serious now. "You know, Ellie, you could get that house back." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I used to handle property transfers for contractors," he explained. "If your daughter forged or misrepresented anything in those papers, the sale might not be legal. You still might have rights." I laughed, but it came out shaky. "Frank, it's too late for that." He shrugged. "Maybe, but maybe not. Sometimes all it takes is looking at the right detail no one else bothered to read." I watched him pack up his tools, that small spark in my chest flickering again. "You really think there's a chance?" He met my eyes. "I think there's always a chance if you've still got fight in you." After he left, I sat by the fixed window, feeling the stillness for the first time. The wind outside had quieted, and so had something inside me. I turned the sewing machine on again, the motor humming low and steady. As the needle moved through the fabric, I realized I wasn't sewing out of habit anymore. I was sewing because I finally wanted to build something again. Maybe not for Vanessa this time, but for myself. And that thought alone felt like the first breath of spring after a long, cold winter. The next morning, the smell of rain mixed with the scent of machine oil as I sat at the table, rereading Vanessa's letter for the 10th time. Frank's words from yesterday kept looping in my head. "You could get that house back." I wanted to believe him, but belief was a luxury I'd stopped affording myself years ago. Still, something in the way he said it, calm, certain, without pity, made me pull out the stack of papers I'd tucked away in the drawer. The notary forms, the refinance letter, the so-called updates. I spread them across the table like puzzle pieces that had been cut to confuse. When Frank showed up that afternoon with his tool bag and a smile, I didn't waste time with small talk. I pointed at the papers. "You said there might be a way. Can you look at these?" He set down his bag and pulled out a pair of reading glasses. "All right, let's see what we're working with." I watched him trace each line with his finger, the way a man reads blueprints before building something that matters. "This one here," he said, after a few minutes tapping the notarized form, "this isn't standard for a property transfer. See how they bundled the transfer of ownership with a power of attorney clause?" "I don't understand," I said, leaning closer. "It means someone gave legal authority to act on your behalf. But this line," he pointed at a tiny section printed in italics, "this says the transfer wasn't valid without a separate verification step. Did anyone call you after you signed?" "No," I said slowly. "They just told me to sign where they marked." Frank leaned back, exhaling. "Then this might not hold up in court. They rushed it through to make it look legitimate." The room was quiet except for the sound of the rain tapping against the trailer roof. "You're saying it could be undone?" "I'm saying," he replied, looking at me steadily, It's possible your daughter and son-in-law never fully owned that house to begin with. My throat tightened. For the first time, the word hope didn't feel like a trick. Frank took the papers with him to make copies, promising to ask a friend who worked in real estate law to take a quick look. I watched from the window as he left, the rain soaking his jacket, and I thought, maybe not everything in life was meant to be taken quietly. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant rumble of thunder. The sound no longer scared me. It sounded like the world clearing its throat, like something about to shift. 2 days later, Frank returned with a manila folder and a half smile. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. Inside the folder were highlighted pages and sticky notes full of neat handwriting. "My friend looked over everything," he said. He confirmed what I thought. The deed transfer wasn't properly processed. "Technically, you're still listed as a co-owner, not a previous owner." I blinked. "Co-owner?" "Yep, which means your daughter can't legally sell or refinance without your consent. And that refinance they did?" He flipped another page. "It's void. They didn't have the right to sign for it." I felt dizzy. For months I'd lived like a ghost in exile and lost everything, but now, on paper, I still existed. Frank smiled at my silence. "I know it's a lot to take in, but it's good news, Ellie. You've got leverage now." The word leverage felt strange in my mouth, foreign but powerful. "What do I even do with that?" I asked. He shrugged. "That depends on what kind of woman you want to be. The one who lets them keep everything, or the one who reminds them who built it all in the first place." That night I didn't sleep. I made tea and sat at the sewing table, staring out the window at the flickering streetlight. I could almost hear Robert's voice in my head. "You built that home, Ellie. Don't let anyone take your name off it." The next morning I put on my best coat, the one I'd sewn from leftover fabric years ago, and called the county records office. The woman on the line sounded bored until I mentioned the address. "Yes, Mrs. Brooks," she said after a pause. "The property shows both your name and a secondary party, but it looks like the transfer isn't fully recorded. Would you like to schedule an appointment to review it?" My hand trembled slightly. "Yes, please, as soon as possible." The appointment was set for Friday morning. Frank insisted on driving me. "You're not walking into that place alone," he said firmly. The county building was colder than I remembered, all glass and grey carpet, the kind of place where people smile without meaning it. The clerk led us to a cubicle with a beige computer and a stack of dusty binders. She clicked a few keys, then turned the screen toward me. "There it is," she said. "Owner of record, Eleanor Brooks. Secondary party, Vanessa Holloway." I stared at the screen, the letters blurring. It was my name, still there, still alive, still mine. Frank leaned in, whispering, "Told you." When we walked back outside, the wind hit my face hard, but it felt clean, like the world was giving me back air I hadn't realised I'd been holding. In the car, Frank looked over and said, "You don't have to decide anything today, but whatever you do, do it on your own terms." I nodded, staring out at the city skyline. The buildings looked smaller than they used to, less intimidating. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel powerless. When we pulled up at the trailer, Patty was outside watering her plants. "Well, don't you look like someone who just buried a secret?" she said with a grin. "Not buried," I said softly. "Just dug one up." And for once, I didn't feel like I was living in an ending. It felt like the start of something I'd forgotten how to reach. The kind of peace that doesn't come from giving up, but from finally deciding not to. When I opened my eyes that morning, sunlight was already spilling through the patched curtain, landing on the stack of papers from the county office. My name, Eleanor Brooks, was right there in black ink, undeniable and legal. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I wasn't just some old woman sitting in a trailer sewing to fill the hours. I was the rightful owner of something that mattered. Frank had called the night before, his voice warm and steady. "Ellie, you've got options," he'd said. "You can take them to court. Or, if you'd rather not fight like they do, you can make the truth work for you." Those words kept echoing in my head as I made coffee. Make the truth work for you. I wasn't the kind of person who wanted revenge, at least not the loud kind. But there's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is about hurting. Justice is about balance, and I'd spent too many years living out of balance. By noon, I was sitting across from Frank at a diner near downtown, the kind with squeaky booths and coffee that tasted like rusted metal. He had a legal pad in front of him, covered in notes. "If you go to court," he said, "it'll take months, maybe a year. Lawyers, fees, depositions, messy business. You'll win, but it'll drain you." I stirred my coffee slowly. "And the other way?" He smiled faintly. "You remind them what they owe you, but not through anger, through ownership. Quiet ownership." I leaned in. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, tapping the pad, "you let them live with what they did, while you take back the life they thought they erased." We spent the next few hours sketching it out. I'd keep the house under my name, file for property restoration quietly through the county's dispute office. No lawsuit, no headlines. There were just a few signatures in the right places. Then, when Vanessa and Ethan realised they couldn't sell or refinance, the panic would set in. "They'll come to you," Frank said. "They'll have no choice." The idea scared me and thrilled me at the same time. The thought of seeing them again, of facing them without breaking, made my chest tighten. But I wasn't the same woman they'd left behind in that driveway. That evening, I went back to the trailer and pulled out Robert's old journal. He'd used it to track the renovation costs for the house. Inside, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a small note tucked between the pages, written in his careful handwriting. "If life ever takes what's yours, Ellie, remember, you built it once, you can build again." I read that line 3 times. It wasn't about walls or roofs, it was about dignity. So I decided I wouldn't just take back the house. I'd rebuild my life with purpose. The next morning, I visited the Silver Pines Community Centre, a small non-profit that helped older adults find work or housing. The director, a young woman named Marissa, looked surprised when I told her I could sew. "We could use someone to teach basic sewing and mending classes," she said. "Twice a week. Paid, of course." I laughed softly. "Paid? For teaching something I've done since I was 12? She smiled. "People will pay to learn what you never forgot." It wasn't much, but it was something. By the next week, I was standing in a small classroom surrounded by women and men my age. Some widowed, some retired, some just lost. All of us threading needles with trembling fingers and stubborn pride. When I showed them how to fix a tear in a jacket, I realised I was teaching more than sewing. I was showing them how to repair something broken and still call it beautiful. That night, as I packed up, Marissa stopped me. "You've got a gift, Mrs. Brooks. You don't just teach, you remind people they still matter." Her words stayed with me. A few days later, Frank came by with a thick envelope. "County confirmed everything," he said. "The property reverts to you. You're the legal primary owner again. They'll get notified soon." My heart raced, but I kept my tone calm. "So it's official?" "Official," he said with a grin. "And the best part? They won't know until they try to make a move. That's when they'll realise they can't touch it without you." I nodded slowly, the coffee in my hand trembling slightly. "Good, good," he repeated, amused. "You sound almost peaceful." "I am," I said, "because I'm done chasing what's fair. I'm just reclaiming what's mine." Later that night, I sat at my sewing table and turned on the small TV Patty had given me. The local news played softly in the background, but I barely heard it. I was too busy sketching, not dresses this time, but plans. Real plans. Maybe I'd turn the house into something new when I got it back. Not just a home, but a place that mattered. A space for women like me who'd been discarded by the people they loved to start again. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was evolution. When the rain started again, I didn't flinch. I just listened to the rhythm of it against the window. Steady, patient, unstoppable. The kind of sound that reminds you storms don't last forever, but they sure can wash a lot clean. The phone buzzed beside me. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "Mom, we need to talk." The sender ID said Vanessa. I stared at it for a long moment, the glow of the screen lighting my face. Then I set the phone down beside the sewing machine, took a deep breath and began threading a new needle. Steady hands, clear mind, ready for whatever needed stitching next. The house looked smaller than I remembered when I stood at the gate again. Maybe it was the months away, or maybe it was because I finally saw it clearly, not as a symbol of loss, but as something waiting to be reborn. The grass was overgrown, The mailbox hung crooked, and the paint had peeled along the porch rail. Still, it was mine again. Every nail, every board, every memory. Frank parked his truck behind me and got out with his tool belt slung over one shoulder. "Well," he said, scanning the house, "she's rough, but she's got bones." "She's got more than bones," I said quietly. "She's got stories," he grinned. "Then let's give her a new one." For weeks we worked side by side. Frank fixed what time had broken: the porch steps, the roof, the stubborn door that used to squeak when Robert came home late. I repainted the kitchen walls a soft yellow, the same colour Robert once called sunlight trapped indoors. The neighbours must have thought I was crazy, a 70-year-old woman hauling paint cans and scrubbing floors, but every brushstroke felt like a declaration. I was back, and this house wasn't going to die in silence. Patty came by with sandwiches and her usual commentary. "You two look like a Hallmark movie," she teased, handing Frank a lemonade. "Careful, Ellie, next thing you know he'll be proposing with a paint roller." Frank chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Only if she promises not to make me repaint the trim again." We laughed, and for a moment everything felt light, like life was quietly forgiving me for believing it was over. But beneath that laughter, something deeper was forming. As I looked around the neighbourhood, at the empty house across the street, at the elderly woman who shuffled to her mailbox every day alone, I realised I wasn't the only one who'd been discarded by family. There were others, plenty of others, left behind when love became inconvenient. That night, I sat on the back porch with Frank, a cool breeze rustling the magnolia tree. "You know," I said, staring out into the yard, "this place could be more than just my home." Frank looked at me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about turning it into a space for women like me, women who gave everything to their families and ended up with nothing, a place to live, to heal, to remember who they are." He smiled, that slow, knowing smile of his. "You already have the name, don't you?" "Brooks Senior Haven," I said, the words tasting right as soon as they left my mouth. "Not a nursing home, a real home, a safe one." Frank leaned back in his chair. "You realise that's going to take work, right?" I nodded. "Good thing I've got someone who's good with a hammer." We started small. The front room became a common space. The old guest bedroom turned into a sewing and craft area. I called the local church, then the community centre, asking if they knew any older women struggling with housing or loneliness. The first to arrive was Margaret, a retired librarian whose son had sold her condo out from under her. Then came Lillian, whose daughter had moved to California and forgot to send the plane ticket back. They came with little more than suitcases and shame, and I made sure the shame stayed at the door. We cooked together, ate together, told stories late into the night over tea. I watched the colour return to their faces, the laughter return to their voices. The house filled up again, not with furniture, but with life. One afternoon, while teaching them how to mend curtains, I realised something that made my chest tighten. For so many years, I'd believed my worth ended when my family stopped needing me. But here, surrounded by women stitching and laughing and rediscovering their strength, I understood I hadn't lost my purpose. I'd just been saving it for the right people. Word spread fast. A local reporter came by after hearing about the widow who turned her stolen home into a sanctuary. When the article was published, donations started arriving, boxes of fabric, groceries, even a cheque from a former student of mine who'd recognised my name. The house was alive again, not polished, not perfect, but alive in the best way possible, full of second chances. Frank came by one evening carrying a small plaque he'd made in his workshop. He handed it to me with a grin. Figured the place deserved a sign. It read, "Brooks Senior Haven, where dignity lives." I ran my fingers over the carved letters, feeling tears sting my eyes. "You made this?" "Every letter," he said, and I meant every word. We mounted it right above the front gate. As the sun dipped behind the trees, its light hit the plus right, making the gold lettering glow. From the porch, I could hear laughter inside, Margaret and Lillian arguing about who made the better cornbread. For a moment, I closed my eyes and breathed it in. The warmth, the noise, the belonging. And standing there beside Frank, I realised something simple but powerful. I hadn't just taken back my home, I'd built something that couldn't be taken again. Because once you've been broken and rebuilt yourself, no one can own you. Not on paper, not in life. I turned to Frank and smiled. You know, this place doesn't just feel like home anymore, I said. It feels like justice. He laughed quietly. Justice with good cornbread. That's my favourite kind. The screen door creaked open and Lillian's voice carried out. Ellie, we're out of tea! You hiding it again? I shook my head, grinning as I walked back inside. No, Lillian, I called out. I'm just making sure there's enough for everyone. The morning news hummed softly from the kitchen radio while I sliced apples for a pie. It wasn't habit, it was peace. The house smelled like cinnamon and paint, the way it used to when life felt whole. I was rolling dough when Frank walked in through the side door, his boots leaving prints on the floor. He looked like he had something on his mind. You might want to sit down for this, he said, setting a folded newspaper on the counter. I wiped my hands on a towel and raised an eyebrow. That line never leads to good news. Depends on who you're rooting for. I unfolded the paper. The headline read, Local couple faces financial crisis after fraud investigation. And there they were, Vanessa and Ethan. Her name in print looked smaller than I remembered. The article said their real estate company had been caught using falsified documents to secure multiple home loans. Ethan was being questioned. Vanessa's name was listed under associate. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. Then I put the paper down and took a slow sip of coffee. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, not joy either. Just a quiet confirmation that the universe still kept score. Frank leaned against the counter. They'll lose everything, Ellie. House, cars, business. You know what they say about building a life on someone else's foundation. I nodded, staring out the window at the magnolia tree swaying in the yard. It always collapses eventually. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Mom? Vanessa's voice cracked through the line. I didn't know who else to call. Her tone was unsteady, stripped of the polish it once had. Ethan's gone, she said. He drained the accounts, took the car, the investors are calling. I can't. She stopped to breathe. They froze everything. I can't even pay rent. I didn't speak right away. I could hear traffic in the background, maybe her pacing on a city sidewalk. For the first time, she sounded small. Not powerful, not superior, just lost. Finally, I said, Vanessa, you should call a lawyer. I did. They said there's nothing they can do until Ethan turns himself in. She paused, her breath shaking. Mom, I know I don't deserve to ask, but can I come home? I looked around the kitchen, the freshly painted cabinets, the framed photo of the women from the Haven laughing in the garden. You mean the house? Yes, she whispered. I exhaled slowly. That house isn't yours anymore, but I'll think about what's best. There was silence on the other end. Then quietly, okay. When the call ended, I sat there a long while, not angry, just thoughtful. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter, who had thrown me out of my home, was now homeless herself. It would have been easy to call that justice, to hang up and move on, but there's a kind of revenge that burns slow and deep, the kind that doesn't gloat, just teaches. The next morning, I told Frank what happened. He nodded, chewing his toast. So what are you going to do? I'm not sure yet, I said, but I know what I'm not going to do. And that is, be like her. He smiled faintly. That's exactly why you'll come out ahead. By that afternoon, I'd decided. I called Vanessa back. If you want to come, you'll have to work, I told her. There's room here at Brooks Senior Haven, but you won't be a guest. You'll be part of the team. We're short on hands for meal prep and maintenance. There was a pause. Then she said softly, I'll do anything, Mom. I just need a place to start over. When she arrived 3 days later, she didn't look like the same woman who once ordered movers around my living room. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes, those sharp, confident eyes, were dull with exhaustion. Margaret and Lillian were out front trimming hedges when the car pulled up. Friend of yours? Lillian asked. I hesitated. Something like that. Vanessa stepped out, clutching a small suitcase. The women exchanged polite smiles, but didn't ask questions. They'd all seen too many stories like hers to need the details. Inside, I showed her the spare room, plain but clean. You'll help with breakfast at 7, classes at 10, and clean up after lunch, I said. If you can't keep up, you can leave. We don't do pity here. She nodded quickly. I understand. For the next few days, she kept her head down. She washed dishes, scrubbed floors, even helped the others in the garden. I watched from a distance, saying little. She didn't complain once, but every so often I'd catch her looking around the house, her eyes soft, almost wistful, like she finally understood what she'd thrown away. On the 5th night, she found me in the sewing room. "Mom," she said quietly, standing in the doorway, "I saw the article about the Haven. What you've done here, it's beautiful." I didn't look up from the fabric I was hemming. "It's honest work." She stepped closer. "I don't know how you could forgive me enough to let me be here." I met her eyes. "I didn't forgive you to make you feel better. I did it to free myself." She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. "I'm sorry for everything." I believed her this time, not because of the words, but because of the silence that followed, the kind that carries truth. Outside, the lights from the porch glowed soft against the evening sky. The women were laughing in the yard, music playing low from the radio. Vanessa stood there, watching them, and I could see something shift in her posture, a kind of humility that comes only after losing everything you thought made you powerful. And in that quiet, I understood what karma really looked like. It wasn't cruel or loud or cinematic. It was steady, deliberate, and deeply fair. The morning air smelled of dew and bread. Vanessa stood in the kitchen wearing one of the Haven aprons, her hair tied up, sleeves rolled, mixing pancake batter beside Margaret. If someone had walked in without knowing, they'd think she'd been part of this place from the start. I watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet ache forming in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something slower, heavier. The strange tenderness that comes when someone who broke you starts to fix themselves, piece by piece. Margaret cracked a joke about how Vanessa measured sugar like she was handling a bomb, and the room filled with laughter. Even Lillian joined in from the table, pretending to critique their cooking like a judge on a baking show. It felt normal, almost warm, and that normalcy was the kind of healing I never expected to see. After breakfast, I walked outside with Frank. The porch was lined with flower pots that the women had painted the week before. Bright reds, soft blues, one with a crooked heart drawn on the side. Frank lit a cigarette and said, "You did it, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" "Turned pain into purpose. Most people would have just built walls and stayed behind them." I smiled faintly. "I tried walls. They kept me safe, but they also kept me small." He nodded, flicking ash into the dirt. "So what happens now?" "Now?" I looked out at the yard where Vanessa was hanging laundry beside Patty. "Now I make sure the women who come here never feel small again." It wasn't a grand plan. No speeches, no revenge, no headlines, just quiet work, the kind that grows roots instead of scars. That afternoon, a knock sounded at the front door. When I opened it, a man in a suit stood there holding a folder. His badge read County Finance Department. "Mrs. Brooks?" he asked. "I'm here to deliver an updated notice regarding the Maple Drive property." For a second, I froze. "That's this property," he nodded. "Yes, ma'am. The previous tenants attempted to file an appeal claiming ownership rights through a secondary mortgage. It was denied." "Previous tenants," I repeated softly. The words tasted final, not cruel, just factual. He handed me the folder. "Everything's settled now. You're the sole legal owner. They can't make any further claims." When I closed the door, Frank was standing behind me, reading my face. "What's it say?" "They tried one more time," I said, setting the folder on the table. "It didn't work." He gave a low whistle. Karma's got good timing. That evening, as the sun began to drop, Vanessa came to find me in the garden. Her hands were dirty from planting marigolds, her nails chipped. She looked more like the daughter I used to know, the one who helped me in the yard as a kid, laughing when she accidentally watered her shoes. "Mom," she said quietly, "I saw the man at the door. I know what that means." I didn't respond. I just waited. "I tried to fix it," she said, her voice trembling. "I really did. I thought maybe if I could prove something, I could, I don't know, undo it all." "You can't undo what's been done," I said gently. "You can only understand it." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "You're right," I said, my voice calm but not cold. "You don't. But I'm not forgiving you for you, Vanessa. I'm doing it because I don't want to live angry anymore." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I never realized how much I hurt you until I lost everything. Ethan used to say money fixes things. He was wrong. It fixes nothing. For a while, neither of us spoke. The sound of wind moving through the trees filled the silence. Then she said, "If you'll let me, I want to stay here. Help, work, whatever you'll allow." I looked at her, really looked. The pride that used to fill her face had been replaced by humility, the kind you can't fake. I thought about all the times I'd begged for a simple thank you or a kind word or even acknowledgement, and here she was asking not for forgiveness but for purpose. "Fine," I said, "but you start at the bottom like everyone else. No special treatment. The women here have been through their own hells. You'll earn your place same as them." A small relieved smile crept onto her face. "That's fair." Over the next few weeks, she worked harder than anyone. She cooked, she cleaned, she fixed broken chairs. She stayed up late helping Lillian balance the donation books. I could see her shoulders loosen, her face soften. Every act of kindness she gave seemed to heal something old between us. One evening, I found her sitting on the porch steps holding that same photo I'd once clutched in the trailer, her 5-year-old self with frosting on her face. "I remember this day," she said quietly. "You made that cake from scratch. I told you I'd never love anyone more than you." I sat beside her. "And you meant it then?" She looked down. "I want to mean it again." The sky above us was streaked in pink and gold, the kind of sunset that makes you forget everything bad for a few minutes. For a long time, we just sat there, the silence between us, no longer sharp but soft, like a blanket that had finally been mended. Inside, laughter echoed from the kitchen, and the smell of cornbread drifted through the air. Vanessa turned to me and said, "You made something good out of something terrible, Mom. I hope I can learn to do that too." I smiled, watching the women gather plates and pour tea, their voices mixing into the rhythm of the home we'd built. "You're already learning," I said. "You just had to come back to the right place to remember how." The porch light flickered on, moths circling the bulb. Somewhere inside, someone started humming an old song, low and sweet, and for the first time in years, I felt the kind of peace that doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from finally being understood. The sun climbed higher over the yard, catching the rows of marigolds Vanessa had planted last week. She was already outside by the time I stepped onto the porch, hair pulled back, gloves on, knee-deep in soil. I handed her a mug of coffee. She smiled, a small, careful smile, the kind people give when they're learning how to be grateful again. "Thanks," she said, brushing dirt off her hands. "You don't have to keep doing this, you know." "Doing what?" "Treating me like I deserve to be here." I looked at her for a long moment. "Vanessa, you're not here because you deserve it. You're here because you're willing to work for it. That's enough." She nodded, and for a second I caught a glimpse of that little girl again, the one who used to bring me dandelions like they were roses. Over the next few weeks, she became part of the rhythm of the haven. She cooked breakfast, taught Margaret how to use the computer for online grocery orders, even helped Frank fix the old fence out back. She didn't shy away from hard work. In fact, she seemed to welcome it, as if each nail, each scrubbed floorboard erased a piece of who she used to be. One morning, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes. "Donation letters," she said before I could ask. "I thought we could reach out to local businesses, maybe get sponsors for the craft classes." I smiled despite myself. "You sound like me 15 years ago." "Yeah," she said softly, "except I didn't appreciate what that took back then." She looked up at me, and the apology in her eyes was stronger than any words she could have said. Frank dropped by later that day to deliver lumber for the garden benches. When he saw Vanessa working, he raised an eyebrow. "She's got good form," he joked, watching her hammer nails into place. "She's learning," I said. "Looks like she's doing more than that," he replied, his tone thoughtful. "Looks like she's trying to earn something back." That night, as we all ate dinner together, stew and fresh biscuits, I watched Vanessa pass the bread basket to Lillian, who laughed at something she said. The sight hit me like a quiet wave. For months I'd thought this house would always carry the ghost of betrayal, but now it carried something new. Redemption. When dinner ended, I went to wash dishes. Vanessa joined me without being asked. We worked side by side in silence until she finally said, "You know, I keep waiting for the moment you'll tell me to leave." I didn't look up from the sink. Why would I do that? Because I was terrible to you, because I don't deserve this second chance. I rinsed a plate and set it aside. Vanessa, forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about who needs it to move forward. You needed it. And maybe I did too. She didn't respond. Instead, she reached for a towel and started drying the plates, her hands steady, her face calm. For the first time, I realized how much of her father I could see in her. His focus, his stubbornness, his quiet guilt. A few days later, Marissa from the community centre stopped by. She brought flyers for a local event, a fundraiser for senior programs, and suggested we have a booth for Brooks Senior Haven. People love hearing real stories, she said. Something inspiring, something about family and second chances. I wasn't planning to say yes, but Vanessa spoke up before I could. We'll do it, she said, her voice strong. We'll share what this place means. Marissa beamed. Perfect. Saturday at the park. I'll save you a table. When she left, I turned to Vanessa. You sure about that? Mom, I think people should see that mistakes don't have to end everything. Maybe someone out there needs to hear it. So we did it. Saturday morning came, bright and breezy. We set up a folding table under a banner that read, Brooks Senior Haven, where dignity lives. We brought photos of the women, sewing projects, and a batch of Lillian's famous cornbread muffins. People stopped to listen as Vanessa told the story, not the ugly version, not the scandal, but the honest one. My mom taught me what home really means, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. I tried to take that from her once, but she built it again stronger than before, and somehow she let me be part of it. I stood beside her, not saying a word, just watching the crowd nod and smile. When she finished, someone started clapping. Then another, and soon the whole group was applauding. Later, when we packed up, Vanessa looked at me and said, That felt good. It did, I agreed. You told the truth. That's where real change starts. As we drove back home, the air through the open window smelled like grass and summer. She hummed softly to a song playing on the radio, something old and familiar. For once, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. That night, as everyone went to bed, I sat alone on the porch, looking out at the flickering lights in the garden. The world felt balanced again, like it had been waiting for this quiet alignment all along. The screen door creaked, and Vanessa appeared beside me, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed me one and sat down. I used to think karma was about punishment, she said, but now I think it's about lessons. I smiled. Sometimes the lesson is the mercy. She looked out at the yard, the flowers glowing faintly in the moonlight. I don't know if I'll ever make it up to you. You already started, I said. You came back. We sat there until the tea turned cold, the night hummed steady around us. The kind of stillness that only comes after every storm has finally spent itself. The morning of the wedding started with the smell of rain-soaked grass and lemon polish. Lillian had been up since dawn, decorating the garden, fussing over ribbons and chairs like it was her own daughter's big day. Margaret arranged flowers on the tables, sunflowers, hydrangeas, and sprigs of lavender that made the whole yard smell like summer. I stood by the window, watching the women move about, my hands shaking just slightly as I buttoned my dress. The same navy blue one Robert always said made my eyes look like calm water. Frank had insisted we keep things simple. Just vows, friends, and good food, he'd said. No priest, no long speeches, just us and the life we'd built from scratch. Vanessa peeked through the door. You look beautiful, Mom. Her voice was soft but certain. She'd been the one to press my dress the night before, careful not to wrinkle a single seam. Dad would have loved to see this, she added, straightening the lace on my sleeve. He would have, I said quietly. He always liked a happy ending. She smiled, but I could see the shimmer in her eyes. You're getting one now. Out in the yard, Frank was arguing with Patty about where to put the archway. It's crooked, Patty said, stepping back. It's rustic, Frank countered. It's crooked. I laughed from the porch. If it stands long enough for us to say I do, it's fine by me. By noon, guests began arriving. Not family in the traditional sense, but something better. The women from the Haven, the volunteers, neighbours who'd once dropped off donations, even a few folks from town who'd heard about our story and wanted to celebrate. When the music started, a simple tune played on a local boy's guitar, I walked out through the garden, my arm looped through Vanessa's. Her steps were steady, proud. There was a time when walking me down an aisle would have been unthinkable for her. Now, she did it with grace, her hand squeezing mine like an unspoken apology. Frank stood under the archway wearing a grey suit that looked one size too big, his hair neatly combed for once. When I reached him, he whispered, "You sure about this, Ellie?" I snore. I smiled. "I've survived worse." The laughter rippled through the crowd, soft and real. Marissa from the community centre officiated. Her voice carried over the garden, calm and sincere. "This union," she said, "isn't just about two people finding love again. It's about choosing life when the world tried to take it away." As Frank read his vows, I felt something tighten in my chest. "Ellie," he said, "you taught me that home isn't four walls. It's wherever kindness lives. And you made me believe that second chances aren't luck. They're choices." When it was my turn, I took a breath and said, "Frank, you came into my life when I thought it was done. You reminded me that strength isn't always loud, that love can be quiet and patient. You didn't just fix my house, you helped me rebuild my heart." The women in the crowd dabbed their eyes. Patty sniffled loudly enough to make everyone laugh again. When Marissa said, "You may kiss the bride," Frank leaned in slowly, gently, the way a man does when he knows what it means to lose before he learns how to keep. The applause that followed wasn't just for us. It was for every broken heart in that yard that had finally found its rhythm again. Afterward, the celebration moved to the porch. There was homemade food, laughter, stories that overlapped and ran wild. Margaret told everyone how she burned the first batch of cornbread that morning, but blamed it on Lillian's singing. Vanessa helped serve plates, her cheeks pink from the sun, her laughter carrying across the yard like music. At one point, I caught her sitting at a table with Frank, the two of them deep in conversation. He showed her how he built the garden trellis, explaining the balance of the beams like it was a metaphor for life. She listened, nodding, smiling in that shy, grateful way she'd rediscovered. As the evening cooled, strings of fairy lights flickered on, and someone brought out a small radio playing old swing tunes. Frank reached for my hand. "Dance with me," he said. "I haven't danced in years," I laughed. "Good," he said. "Neither have I." We moved slowly, ungraceful but happy, the world fading around us. The sound of laughter, the smell of lemon cake, the feel of grass under our shoes. It all blended into one perfect moment that didn't need to last forever to mean something. When the song ended, Vanessa joined us, wrapping her arms around both of us. "I never thought I'd see you like this again, Mom," she said softly. I touched her cheek. "That's the thing about life, sweetheart. It keeps giving us chances until we finally learn how to take them." The moon climbed higher, silver light spilling over the garden. Lillian was telling a story near the fire pit, everyone laughing. Margaret was passing out slices of cake, and for a moment I stood there and realised the revenge I once wanted had turned into something else entirely. Not punishment, not pride, but peace. The kind that comes when the storm ends and you're still standing, softer, wiser, unafraid. Frank took my hand again, squeezing it gently. "You know, Ellie," he said, "if this isn't karma, I don't know what is." I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder as the firelight danced across the faces of the women who had once been broken and were now blooming again. "It is," I said quietly. "It's just the kind that finally learned to be kind." The garden had grown thick with colour by late summer. Sunflowers towered near the fence line, and the air smelled faintly of mint from the herb patch that Vanessa tended every morning. The laughter from the women drifted across the yard, the kind of soft, content laughter that only comes from people who've finally found where they belong. I sat on the porch swing with a notebook on my lap, a cup of tea beside me and the sound of cicadas humming through the air. The notebook wasn't for sewing patterns or finances anymore. It was for the stories the women told me, stories about loss, hope, and the strange ways life gives back what it takes. Frank came out, wiping his hands on a rag. He still fixed things around the house, though half the time they didn't need fixing. "You're writing again," he said, nodding toward the notebook. "Just collecting voices," I said. "Every woman who's lived here leaves a piece of herself behind. I want people to know what that sounds like." He sat beside me, the wood creaking under his weight. "You ever going to publish it?" I smiled. "Maybe, or maybe it'll just stay here." Something for the next woman who thinks she's alone. Inside, I could hear Vanessa teaching Margaret how to use a tablet to check email. "No, you swipe up, not down," she said, laughing. "There you go." The warmth in her voice made my chest tighten, but in a good way. Life had a way of settling into quiet rhythms after chaos, the kind that made you forget you ever lived without peace. Still, every now and then something small would remind me how far we'd come. Like last week, when a letter came in the mail. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note for Brooks Senior Haven, for the women who found what I lost. E.H. Ethan. Frank frowned when I showed him. "You want to send it back?" I shook my head. "No, I want to turn it into something good. He's trying to buy forgiveness, but we'll turn it into grace instead. So we used the money to build a small greenhouse in the back. Something to grow herbs and vegetables year-round. The women called it the Healing House. Every plant had a name tag, each one dedicated to someone who'd helped them start over. The one in the middle, a rosemary bush, was labelled simply, "For Ellie, who reminded us we're not broken, just waiting to bloom again." One afternoon, I found Vanessa sitting there pruning the basil. The sunlight made her hair look like copper. "Mom," she said, not looking up, "I've been thinking about starting a program here, something for younger women, the ones getting out of shelters or tough divorces. They could learn skills, find work, maybe even stay for a while." I smiled. "Sounds like something worth doing." She looked up then, eyes soft but determined. "You really think I can handle it?" "I think," I said, reaching for her hand, "that you've already proved you can handle much harder things." That evening, the Haven was full again. Neighbours dropping off donations, women from nearby towns visiting to see the garden, laughter spilling through every open window. Patty played music from her old radio, and even Lillian managed to dance a little, waving a dish towel in the air like it was a flag of victory. When the night finally quieted, I returned to the porch with my notebook. The moon hung low and wide, casting a pale glow across the yard. I flipped through the pages, reading fragments of the stories I'd written, not polished or perfect, just honest. There was something healing about putting it all down, not to relive it, but to understand it. The betrayal, the loss, the anger, even the forgiveness, it had all shaped me, but none of it defined me anymore. Vanessa stepped out, a blanket draped over her shoulders. "You're still up," she said, sitting beside me. "Couldn't sleep. My mind's busy." "Writing about us again?" "About all of us," I said, "but mostly about what comes after." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I still can't believe how far we've come." "Neither can I admitted. "But maybe that's what karma really is. Not punishment, not payback, just peace. The kind you earn when you stop begging for love and start living with dignity." For a long while we sat there, listening to the soft hum of night. The world didn't owe us anything, but it had given us exactly what we needed, a second chance. I looked down at my notebook and wrote one last line before closing it. "Karma isn't loud, it's the quiet that comes when you finally stop fighting what's gone and start cherishing what stayed." The porch light flickered as Frank came to lock the door. "You two planning to sleep out here?" he teased. "Maybe," I said. "The view's too good to waste." He chuckled and walked back inside, humming under his breath. Vanessa lifted her head and looked out at the garden, the glow of fairy lights tracing the rows of flowers, the rosemary bush standing tall in the centre. "Mom," she whispered, "you made something beautiful out of everything that went wrong." I smiled. "No." I said softly, "We did." The swing creaked as we swayed gently, the air warm and still, and in that quiet, surrounded by life that had grown from pain, I realised this wasn't revenge at all. It was something purer, the kind of victory that doesn't shout, doesn't sting, doesn't gloat, just peace, deep, earned, and finally ours. As the night settled into stillness, the porch light hummed softly above us. The scent of rosemary and rain drifted through the air, and somewhere inside, Frank's low humming mixed with the creak of the old floorboards. Vanessa had fallen asleep beside me on the swing, her head resting gently against my arm, the same daughter who once broke me, now at peace in the home we rebuilt together. I looked out at the garden, the flowers, the laughter still lingering in the air, the women whose lives had bloomed here, and I realised something simple yet powerful. the sweetest revenge isn't about getting even. It's about standing back up and turning your pain into purpose. That's the quiet victory, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind no one can take away. Because in the end, every family revenge story worth telling isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. It's about realizing that dignity is stronger than betrayal, and forgiveness is the kind of justice that lasts longer than anger. If you've ever been hurt by someone you loved, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from the pieces someone else left behind, remember this. The moment you choose peace over bitterness, you've already won. And that's what true family drama teaches us. It's not just chaos and heartbreak. It's courage, rebirth, and the quiet power of choosing to live with grace. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that real revenge stories aren't about destruction, but about strength, resilience, and healing, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Here we tell the stories that remind you it's never too late to reclaim your life, your peace, and your voice. Leave a comment below and tell me, what does revenge mean to you now? Because maybe, like Ellie, you'll find that the greatest revenge isn't anger, it's becoming happy again.